mistake. The arrivals terminal buzzed with the sound of suitcase wheels, muffled announcements, and travelers in all directions. Pamela Moore stood awkwardly among a row of uniformed drivers, her grip tightening on a homemade cardboard sign that read, Mr. Callahan. At 26, Pamela's life wasn't exactly glamorous. She worked part-time as a waitress at a tiny cafe in Brooklyn and spent her weekends teaching painting to kids at the local church. Her blonde hair was tied back in a low, loose ponytail, strands already escaping from the light breeze drifting through the automatic doors. She wore a second-hand green coat and scuffed boots, not exactly what most people expected from someone holding a name sign at JFK. This wasn't even her job. Her older sister, Amelia, was the one who worked in tourism and guest services. But Amelia had woken up that morning burning with fever and had begged Pamela to help out, just this once. It's simple, Amelia had croaked between coughs. Just hold the sign and take the guy to the hotel. He's flying in from London, name's Mr. Callahan. Some big-shot business guest for an investment conference. Please, Pam. Pamela had sighed, stuffed her sketchbook in her bag just in case, and agreed. Now, she stood alone, surrounded by drivers in polished shoes and matching blazers. Then she saw him. He walked out of the gate with quiet confidence, tall, well-built, early to mid-30s, with a tailored gray coat, dark trousers, and a charcoal scarf wrapped neatly around his neck. His jawline was sharp, and his deep-set eyes scanned the crowd without urgency. Pamela's heart skipped slightly when their eyes met. He slowed when he saw the sign. Pamela lifted it a little higher, awkward but sincere. Mr. Callahan? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The man blinked, then nodded politely. Yes, I am. Great, Pamela said quickly, offering a smile. I'm Pamela Moore. I'm here to pick you up. Welcome to New York. He studied her for a brief moment, something flickering behind his eyes. Amusement, maybe curiosity. Thank you, Miss Moore. This way, please. She turned, leading him toward the parking lot. They walked side by side, neither speaking for a few minutes. Snowflakes began to fall, dotting her coat and catching in his dark hair. Pamela stole a glance at him, noting how calm and composed he seemed. Way too put together for someone just off a transatlantic flight. You travel often? She asked, mostly to fill the silence. More than I'd like, he replied, his voice low and smooth. I'm just helping my sister today. I do not actually work in hospitality or logistics or whatever this is called. His eyebrow raised. Oh? I am a painter. I teach art on the weekends and pour coffee during the week. It's a glamorous life, she said dryly. He let out a quiet laugh. I see. They reached her car, a modest sedan she'd borrowed from a friend. She opened the door for him and started the heater, which sputtered before finally blowing warm air. He settled into the passenger seat while she adjusted the mirror and backed out onto the expressway. For a while, they simply watched the snow fall against the windshield. What kind of art do you teach? He asked eventually. Mostly watercolor and pastels for kids. They're honest critics, you know. If they hate it, they say it. If they love it, they give you a macaroni necklace. He chuckled again. Sounds rewarding. It is, she replied. At least when no one's throwing paint at you. His gaze flickered to her again, curious. Do you still paint for yourself? Pamela hesitated. Sometimes, when there's time and money for supplies. The conversation felt easy, surprisingly so. He was quiet but not cold, polite but not distant. She had expected someone stiff, all business, but instead, he listened. When they finally arrived at the hotel, she pulled into the circular driveway. She turned to him, unsure if she was supposed to hand him something or say something formal. He unbuckled his seatbelt, then looked at her. It's been a long time, he said slowly, since I had a conversation that didn't mention money. Pamela blinked. Oh, well, you're welcome, I guess. He smiled, just barely, but it softened his whole expression. Thank you, Miss Moore. Before she could respond, he stepped out, luggage in hand. The doors closed behind him, and he disappeared into the hotel lobby. Pamela sat there for a moment, stunned. She had no idea who exactly she had just dropped off, but for some reason, the air felt different. Like something unexpected had just started, Pamela Moore returned to her everyday rhythm as if nothing had changed. Mornings started early at the corner cafe in Brooklyn, where she balanced trays of coffee and smiled at customers too distracted to look her in the eye. Afternoons were for her paints and brushes, when she squeezed in moments to sketch in the little studio space she had carved out beside her bedroom window. And on Sundays, she taught watercolor to children at the neighborhood church. But that week, something was different. She found herself pausing more often, lost in thought. On the third evening, after the airport pickup, Pamela sat at her tiny desk with her sketchbook open. Her fingers moved almost automatically across the page, pencil sliding in soft strokes. The image forming was from memory. The calm, observant expression of the man she had picked up by mistake. Theo Callahan. She had never met anyone like him. Reserved, but not rude. Rich, probably, but never boastful. There was something quiet and unguarded in the way he had listened to her talk about art. Like he genuinely cared. She finished shading the curve of his jaw and smiled faintly. It was a habit of hers, drawing people who left an impression. Most never knew. They lived forever only in pencil and paper. What Pamela did not know was that Theo Callahan had not forgotten her either. Back in Manhattan, in a sleek office overlooking the city, Theo sat at his desk with an untouched coffee cooling beside him. He should have been preparing for meetings, scanning quarterly reports, reviewing international contracts. Instead, he found himself typing Pamela Moore Brooklyn into his laptop. It took some digging, but he found a small blog post about community art classes hosted at a church in Park Slope, and her name was listed among the volunteers. The next day, as snow quietly fell across the city, Theo took a rare detour from his carefully structured schedule. No suit, no entourage. Just a warm coat, gloves, and a single intention. When he stepped inside the community center that afternoon, the scent of crayons and paper filled the air. Children's laughter echoed down the hallway. Pamela turned from the chalkboard just as the door creaked open. She blinked. "Theo?" she asked, half laughing, half surprised. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said with a small smile. "I read about this place. Thought I might be interested in sponsoring a few classes." She raised an eyebrow. "You tracked me down to donate art supplies? I suppose that is one way to put it." Pamela crossed her arms, studying him. "You're not exactly subtle, Mr. Callahan." He shrugged lightly. "I am not very good at pretending to forget people." Their conversation picked up with the same strange ease as before. She teased him about being too serious. He responded with understated wit. It was awkward, in a charming sort of way. Mid-sentence, a little girl burst through the door and ran toward Pamela, flinging her arms around her waist. She was maybe 6, with springy curls and a pink dress that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. "Miss Pamela," the girl cried, beaming. "You came back. I saved you a seat next to me for story time." Pamela laughed and brushed a curl from the girl's forehead. "Hi, Sophie. I wouldn't miss it." Theo watched, momentarily speechless. Sophie turned to him, then leaned closer to Pamela and whispered, not so quietly, "Is that your friend? He looks like a prince." Pamela stifled a laugh. Sophie grinned and looked up at Theo. "Miss Pamela is the nicest person in the world. She made me feel better when my mom went to heaven." Theo's breath caught. He hadn't expected that. He glanced at Pamela, who only smiled gently and placed her hand on Sophie's shoulder. In that moment, something shifted inside him. He had sat in thousands of meetings with polished, powerful people, but none had ever moved him like that little girl in the pink dress, or the woman beside her who gave without asking anything in return. As Sophie skipped back to her easel, humming to herself, Theo felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. The week after their encounter at the community center, Pamela noticed something odd, but oddly comforting. Wherever she went, Theo Callahan seemed to appear. At first, it was at the vintage bookstore on Main Street. She was browsing the art section when she heard a familiar voice behind her say, "Did you know Kandinsky also taught children's art classes?" She turned, eyes narrowing playfully. "Are you stalking me, Mr. Sponsor?" He smiled, unbothered. "Just broadening my cultural horizons." Next, it was the tiny tea shop she loved. She was sipping a chamomile blend, sketchbook open on her lap, when he walked in wearing a coat dusted with snow. "You again?" she asked, half joking. "They say good taste is rare," he replied, taking the table across from her. "I suppose we're just consistently well matched." Pamela chuckled, rolling her eyes, but didn't ask him to leave. It continued. The following Saturday, he strolled through Prospect Park while she sat cross-legged under an oak tree, painting the skyline. "You come here often?" she teased as he sat beside her. "I do now," he said simply. Their conversations deepened. He asked questions, not just to pass time, but to understand her world. She told him about her work at the cafe, about her sister Amelia, about her art students, especially Sophie. And one day, as they shared hot cider from a street cart, she admitted her biggest dream. "I want to open a free art gallery and studio," Pamela said. "A place where kids who can't afford supplies or lessons can just come and be artists." "Be kids." Theo looked at her with quiet admiration. "That sounds like something the world desperately needs." She laughed, brushing snow off her coat. "It's probably just a dream. Rent in Brooklyn doesn't come cheap." Theo didn't reply immediately. He simply filed the dream away like a sacred note. Still, for all their growing closeness, neither mentioned the obvious question, who they really were. It was like an unspoken pact. This world they had built without resumes or titles, just shared tea and paint-stained fingers. But secrets have a way of finding daylight. One rainy afternoon, Pamela was leaving the tea shop when she spotted Theo across the street. He was stepping into a sleek black car, the kind that whispered wealth, even in silence. A man in a sharp suit opened the door for him and bowed slightly before closing it behind him. Pamela stood frozen on the sidewalk, raindrops clinging to her coat. Something didn't add up. Sponsors of community art classes didn't usually have drivers or assistants. That night, she sat on her couch, a blanket wrapped around her legs, heart pounding as she opened her laptop. She typed slowly, almost afraid of what she might find. Theo Callahan, New York, Art Foundation. The screen flooded with results. CEO of Callahan Global Investments. Founder of the largest private youth arts grant in the state. Net worth estimated in the hundreds of millions. She stared at the screen, stunned. Every word they had exchanged echoed in her mind. Suddenly, different now, edged with the realization that she had never really known the man sitting across from her on all those quiet afternoons. And yet, he had known who she was from the start. No pretenses. No expectations. Still, Pamela couldn't shake the unease growing in her chest. Why had he never told her? And more importantly, what did it mean for them now? Pamela had always believed in seeing the best in people. But that belief cracked the moment her screen lit up with the truth about Theo Callahan. Not just a kind stranger. Not just a curious man who asked about her dreams. He was the Theo Callahan, CEO, investor, millionaire. The face of the very world she had spent her life avoiding. Wealth, secrets, polished lies, hidden behind charming smiles. And he had let her think he was someone else. The realization stung deeper than she expected. Not because of who he was, but because of what he had chosen not to say. For 3 days, she ignored his texts. For a week, she avoided the usual haunts. The tea shop, the park, the bookstore. When he finally showed up at her door with a worn leather notebook in hand, he did not bring flowers. No rehearsed speech, no empty apologies. "I just wanted you to have this," he said quietly, handing it to her like something fragile. Then he left. Pamela stood in the doorway for a long moment before closing it, the notebook pressed against her chest, like it might burn. She waited hours before she opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, were pages of moments, days documented in surprising detail. First time I saw her, holding a Mr. Callahan sign with trembling hands. I nearly walked past, but her nervous smile made me stop. Day 2, she told me she only came because her sister was sick. She laughed at how lost she was in my world. I wanted to stay lost with her. Day 5, she helped a girl named Sophie paint a sky with no clouds. I wondered if she even realized she was someone's blue sky. Each page was a glimpse into his world, colored not by titles or wealth, but by her. And it broke her heart. Not because he lied, but because he cared. Still, she could not bring herself to answer. Not yet. Trust was not something she gave lightly. Not after years of watching people choose power over people. Then the call came. Sophie had collapsed during a weekend class. The doctors said it was a viral infection complicated by stress. She would need to rest. Stay at the hospital for observation. Pamela rushed to the hospital, only to find Sophie already tucked into a private room with a window view and a stuffed rabbit in her arms. A nurse handed Pamela a folder. "All expenses are covered," she said. "Anonymous donor." Inside the folder was a handwritten note. "For the girl who painted a sky with no clouds. From someone who believes in her dream." Next to it was a fresh set of watercolor paints, tied with a pink ribbon. Pamela stared at the note until the words blurred. Theo hadn't tried to win her back with gestures of power. He had simply believed in Sophie, in her. And somehow, that belief mattered more than any title ever could. The headline hit Pamela like a wave crashing through glass. Brooklyn art teacher wins the heart of reclusive millionaire. The photo beneath it was a candid shot of her and Theo outside the community center. She was laughing, unaware of the camera. He was looking at her, not as a CEO, but as a man deeply, visibly in love. The article, however, was less kind. It painted her as a schemer, a nobody who had climbed the social ladder through charm and convenience. Within hours, her phone lit up with calls. Some curious, some cruel. By the next morning, Pamela was asked not to return to the cafe. "We can't risk the attention," the manager said awkwardly. By that afternoon, the church suspended the weekend art classes. "Until things settle down," the message read. "We hope you understand." She did, but it did not make it hurt less. By nightfall, she had unplugged her phone, curled up with Sophie's old sketchpad in her lap, and stared at the blank page for hours. For the first time in years, she did not want to draw. She did not want to feel. Then came Theo. Not with apologies. With action. He called a press conference the next day, something he had avoided for years. Dozens of cameras, journalists, headlines waiting to be written. He stood tall behind the podium, no script in hand, no corporate filter in his voice. "I did not come here to clarify a scandal," he began. "Because there is no scandal." He paused, gaze steady. "I came to talk about Pamela Moore." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She did not chase money. She did not ask for anything. She gave her time, her art, her heart, to children who had none of those things. He held up the same leather notebook he once gave her. "I wrote in here every day because I was too afraid to say it out loud. But today, I want the world to hear me clearly. A breath. I was the one who gained everything. She gave me the only thing I could never buy, my humanity back." He ended the conference there. No questions, no drama. Just truth. That evening, Pamela arrived at the community center to gather her things. Her heart was still heavy, unsure if anything he said would matter. But as she stepped into the art room, she froze. The lights were on. The easels were set. And every seat was full. Parents, children, volunteers, all waiting. One mother stood. "We don't believe the media," she said firmly. A father added, "We believe in what our kids brought home from this room. Hope." Then Sophie, standing proudly in the front, held up a picture. It was of Pamela, surrounded by stars, with a speech bubble that said, "You make the world colorful." Pamela's eyes filled with tears. This time, not from defeat, but from overwhelming love. The marquee outside the event announced in bright letters, "Children's Art Festival, sponsored by Callahan Innovations." Pamela Moore held the hand of 6-year-old Sophie, who giggled under the fluttering banners and clutched a pink balloon shaped like a star. Sophie wore her favorite pink dress, the one with the tulle skirt that spun like a fairy's wings, and her golden curls bounced as she skipped ahead of Pamela. Pamela glanced at Sophie, and then across the lawn to see Theo Callahan standing by a large canvas placed on an easel. He had removed his overcoat and rolled up his sleeves. For a moment, his polished CEO persona slipped away and she thought, "There's the man I met, just here, being human." Sophie, over here, Theo called, waving. The little girl sprinted to him and tugged his hand. Uncle Theo, draw with me. Come on. Theo turned to Pamela and laughed quietly, the sound unfamiliar in his usual quiet poise. Did I just get appointed art partner for Sophie? He asked. You did, Pamela replied, smiling.